Hey, welcome back. And in this video, we'll be talking about lean and agile controls. How do you keep control and report out on a lean and agile project? All right, first we'll start out with scope control. Here it is. Scope is kept in your project or product backlog. All right. Each of these backlog items is a different feature, and each feature has been assigned a certain number of points. There they are. Now, there may be multiple stories in those features, and who knows, but each one of those is a different, has its points value associated with it. This is called the product backlog, right? So the little arrow down here says it goes on and on and on and on. Who knows how long it is? This is your product backlog. You take a subset of that often, and you'll call that a project backlog or a capacity, right? You're creating a capacity within your organization, or you may call it MVP, right? Here's my minimally viable product. This is my release one. Whatever you call it, you've grouped it, okay? So this is the grouping that you've created, and now you want to control that release, that product, that project. The total number of points in there is 63 points. The total number in here we go. So within a project, sometimes you'll have multiple releases. So you've got this release here, and it's 36 points. And the way you control this is very simply just to say, someone comes and they want to add scope to your project. So they're going to add, they want to add another 8-point story. Well, and they want to add it to the current release. That's fine. You have a couple of options. We can either change our estimated release date, and that may come in, I don't know. It just depends on how much the team works together and how much their velocity increases. But based on our current velocity, our release date is X. And if you add an 8-point story to that, you take the velocity and calculate the amount of time that would add, then it would be Y, right? This is our new release date. Or you can take this 8-point story and push it out of the current release and add your 8-point story in where that one is. So feature 4 would get taken out. Feature X would get put in, and feature 4 is now rolled down into this part of the project. And if it just rolls down there, then you've kept the release timeline the same and the release points value the same. It still remains at 36, but you will have increased the total number of points out here to 71 points, and so that's going to take you a little longer to deliver. Now, the option at that point is, well, we want to keep this total project date the same too. Okay, then you have a couple of different options. You could either take out this 8-point story because you want to swap an 8 for an 8 and pull it out, or you could push out this 13-point story because it's lower in priority. Remember, these are stack ranked in priority order. So the further down it is, the lower priority it is. So the product owner then has to make a decision. Is this 8-point story significant enough that I want to keep it and I'm willing to let this 13-point story go? Or really, to add the 8 points that rolled down from here, I'll bump this 13-pointer out. But it's very clear. It's very easy for them to make that, to see that decision. It might not be easy to make that decision, but it's very easy to see that decision. But those of us who are on the project, who are in the delivery side, need to make sure that we are asking that question, right? So it's the product owner's responsibility to make that decision. But it's our responsibility as a delivery team, it's your responsibility to make sure that the question is asked. Hey, what do you want to do? Right? There's a joint ownership of this backlog. So you need to be in conversation and don't just, sometimes I've heard teams just complain that, oh, they keep jamming stuff into the release. Well, did you ever ask them to not jam it in? Did you ever tell them, oh, that's cool, we can do that. Here's what it does. Here's the impact of that. It's going to change this. Whenever I've done that and we have the empirical evidence of your actual velocity, right, calculated against the story points in the backlog, there's really no arguing with it. In the old way of doing things, right, in the waterfall way, I would have a Gantt chart, and it always would happen that someone would jam more scope into it. And I could tell you, we could go into why, but someone would always jam more scope into that project, and they would say, keep the dates the same, just squish stuff together. Because everything on it was an estimate, and there was no empirical proof of what the speed of delivery was, you couldn't really argue back with them. You could, well, this was their estimates, but sure, we'll see if they can do better. We'll try and work harder, you know. If you have a velocity, there's no arguing with it. And I actually have seen, I'm trying to think if I've ever heard someone push back on a velocity argument. I can't remember any product owner that has actually pushed back on a velocity argument and said, no, increase your velocity, right? I mean, everybody wants to increase the velocity, but that's kind of a given. So that's how you would control scope, is just having those conversations. All right, schedule controls. Schedule, again, is easy. Let's talk about the Kanban for a minute. There's different ways for Scrum versus Kanban. In a Kanban project, you control schedule by looking at your WIP limits and controlling your WIP limits. So you want to be sure that you're keeping strong WIP limits and actually sticking to them. So you can keep your WIP limits at multiple places. WIP means work in process. If you haven't watched the video on Kanban, go watch the video on Kanban. So here's a WIP limit of 5 on the build column, right? This is the ready or queue, and this is the in process column. So you could put the WIP limit here on the actual column, right? The build column. You never put it on queue and in process. Don't do that. You're messing things up. Put it on the total column. Or you can put it up here at the higher level. You could put it, because we talk about things being in requirements design and build and test. So that's the way we think about work. Okay, great. Then that's where we'll put the WIP limits. You'll have a WIP limit of 5 here and a WIP limit of 8 there. That's totally cool. Or you could even say, well, we work as a team, and because people switch back and forth and move across these things. Okay, so then we'll put our WIP limit up here at the system WIP limit. And so the whole system can't exceed 13 points. The farther down you can push it, the more flow you will get. So I just want to be really clear about that. But if people flow between columns, right, if the same person is doing this work and this work, requirements and design, then you need to put your WIP limit at this higher level, because it's ridiculous to have a WIP limit at a lower level when it's the same person doing both pieces of work. It doesn't make any sense. So that's how you would do schedule control. Then you'd be able to see, okay, how much work is getting through, and are our WIP limits appropriate? As soon as things are flowing really smoothly, then you might want to tweak with these, right? To push yourselves. Ask yourself as a team, not don't push a team. If you're a leader, don't push a team to do this. But you may ask them, hey, have you thought about increasing your WIP limits to flow more work through? It looks like you've got some slack time, a lot of slack time across here. So let's see if we can flow it. But yeah, so that's how you would control schedule. In a Scrum project, you would control schedule with, actually you would do this in a Kanban project too. You could control schedule with the cumulative flow chart as well. You saw that you could do it, you saw that you could do it with a burn-up chart, but I would rather see you using a cumulative flow, either in Scrum or Kanban. People often think of this more in a Kanban place. If you were to draw a cumulative flow of this work, you would see that the blue line here, the top, is everything that's in your backlog. You would see that the goldish color here would probably be the requirements section. You'd see the next color would be the design section. Then you'd see build, and then you'd see test, and then you'd see accepted, right? So these would be different. This is a Scrum process here. You'd actually have a separate band for each column. You wouldn't split it and have a band for the queue and ready, queue and in process, but you'd have a separate band for each step in the process. All right, so that's schedule control. Pretty straightforward. And you use this to see where you are in schedule, or how are we progressing? What is the likelihood of us meeting our timeline? And if you aren't meeting your timeline, then you go back up to here, scope control, and go, well, we can either pull things in or take things out of the schedule here, of the scope, to increase or decrease the time to the delivery time. It's really not a good idea to try and do that with budget, which would mean adding people. Usually, if you increase the budget, you're usually adding people to it, unless you are maybe adding budget to add capacity in the sense of processing power. If you were on an animation project, for example, and rendering took a really long time, you might add budget to buy more processing capacity. Here we'll talk about basics of value-based releases and how you control budget. This is a view of the project based on release value. So if the value of this 12 release project, let's say it's a 12-month project. Release 1 is January, February, March, all the way to the end. And the first release that we make, because we're prioritizing the work and we're working on the most important things first, and we get a minimally viable product out right away, we get that out in the first month, we're able to see that 25% of the value of the product we're creating is going to be realized in that first month. So people are going to be able to log in and buy things and check out all with that first thing. Now, it might not have advanced features. It might not even have some other of the basic features, but it'll have the minimally viable features that are required. And boom, we'll get 25% of the value out of that immediately. The next release in February here is going to have about 17% of the remaining value. And then this one's going to have about 12%. And then this one's going to have about 9%. And this one's going to have about 7%. And 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 2. Right? You can see how that works. So how do you control budget? Well, there's several ways you can control budget. You could say, you know what? We are here at release 9, and we look at these remaining things and go, you know what? I don't think we need those things. Our customers are happy, and they're getting 80% of the value. Here is only what? If that's 2, 4, 8, 12% of the value is right here in these last 4 things. They're getting 88% of the value. I think if that math is correct. That's a lot of value. Maybe they're getting 98. I don't know. I don't do math well. But they're getting most of their value. So why bother putting these things out? Let's cut that. Let's control budget that way. All right. So you may be used to the traditional scope, schedule, budget way of looking at a project or product. And this gives you a mapping of value-driven scope, schedule, budget, or in an Agile project or value driven in a lean project, meaning a Kanban project. In both of them, you would control it, the scope by looking at the backlog. You would control it by looking at the story points. You would control scope by looking at the story points that are in the backlog. In a Kanban team, you don't actually do points estimation as often. You just actually have the cards, the stories. So you go by the stories. And sometimes in Scrum groups, they actually go out and blow things all the way out to the task level. So you look at, scope control at the task level as well for the team. Schedule, you would be looking at things like the velocity, burn up, burn down, and cumulative flow, and the story points, right? Where are you with all those? Those are the tools and levers that you would use. In a Kanban project, you would be looking at things like cycle time, lead time, WIP control, as well as looking at the cumulative flow to see that and the available stories. For budget, you would be looking at the team's burn rate, right? That's basic team burn rate, right? You don't charge back by different variables and all that. Don't go crazy with all that stuff. Have a team that's dedicated, and then they have a burn rate. You can look at their velocity. That's a variable into the budget, and velocity plus story points gives you, how much they're able to accomplish for a burn rate, a given burn rate. In a Kanban project, you're looking at burn rate with cycle time and stories. Right? Those will tell you that. If you don't understand lead time, cycle time, or WIP limits, go back and watch the video on Kanban, and that'll explain that to you. So that is it. These are the control measures for an Agile and a lean effort.